I'm Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. Welcome to Big Book Compendium. So I'm going to start off with a story. This is one of my favorite ones. And the story is there's a snake that's off crawling around, and he crawls over this really sharp saw and gets cut. So in anger, the snake wraps himself around the saw, with this thick muscular body, and squeezes the life out of the saw. With each angry squeeze, the snake feels more pain and continues because he wasn't going to let go of the saw, let the saw get away with it, what it had done to him. So the snake, refusing to let go, dies, not knowing the whole time he needed to let go of his internal pain and focus on the future, where it was going, in order to live. Instead of, the snake unfortunately lost its life and didn't even see it coming. So the moral here is we must let go of anger, because we can squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. We must forgive others that hurt us, and don't give people or things power over us, because it will kill us. So anger is a very, I like to say, paralyzing emotion. We all know that, and yet so many wear anger on their sleeve, and so on this planet, and with no clue how powerful anger is, how many lives are affected. Does anger engulf? How many lives that our anger engulf? That is the point. It's true poison of the soul. I mean, that's the fact. And the reason it's poison of the soul, because it contaminates all aspects of our lives. And its anger is capable of shifting our thinking. One moment we're calm and serene and positive, emotional security. A second later, we're in emotional rage, affecting our emotional security in a negative way. So resentments not only drive our thinking, they drive people right out of our lives. And our instincts tell us to go prove we're right and seek revenge. And that all that does is create harm and more guilt. And so we must discover our mistakes. A lot of people say our part, and it's not really about our part. It's about our mistakes. In our resentments, the question is, and we'll get to this later, is where are we to blame? So we let go, so we can let go, and find out who's, once we find out whose fault it is, we can let it go. So we must redo kind of like our Hardwell program and unlearn the way we have looked at life. Now, that's something we can't do on our own. I could sit there and buy all these self-help books and say, I'm gonna unlearn the way I've lived. I'm gonna change my thinking. If we could do that, we wouldn't need this, and we would be fine, and probably we went to some type of writing a self-help book somewhere. Well, all we gotta do is trust the steps in the process, and let our sponsor guide us through it, 4 through 9, and we unlearn this. So we need a method to untwist how we know what drives us, become aware, the deeper aware of our thinking, as I called it earlier, rigorous honesty. Honesty is awareness of where I'm at. That's just saying I have a resentment. Rigorous honesty is where I go deep and I say, do I have, is my resentment driven by pride, by self-esteem, by security, right? Let's go to page 30. Now you might ask me, why are we going back to 30? That's more about alcohols. We covered it already. So we're gonna have some fun with this first paragraph. I'm going to change the word drinking to thinking. Change drinking to thinking. So this makes it very unique. It says, most of us have been unwilling to admit that we are real alcoholics. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it's not surprising that our thinking careers have been characterized by countless attempts to prove we could think like other people, like pride. All of us have done this. Try to prove we could think like other people. The idea somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his thinking is the great obsession of every abnormal thinker. Think about that for a second. Think, right? They say. The idea that somehow, someday he will try to control and enjoy his thinking is a great obsession of every abnormal thinker. Oh, if I only think this way, if I think better that way. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing and may pursue its insanity and death. The point here is thinking is the problem. My friend used to say, AA should really be called Emotions Anonymous, because that's what we're looking at here. And I said this before, the mind that is the problem will not ever overcome the problem. Like self-will will never overcome self-will. A sick mind will never overcome a sick mind. A resentful mind cannot, impossible to overcome resentment. Yet in recovery, all the time, we will attempt to try to control our thinking with a hopeless mind, not knowing that this transformation has to happen. You know, there's a movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger called The Terminator. I'm sure all of us have seen that. And the Terminator, you know, he destroys everything in his path. He's, you know, killing people, shooting up buildings. You know, they can't stop it. It's a killing machine. You know, it can't be reasonable. You know, they can't beat it. You know, and it's programmed to do what it's supposed to do. But how do they stop it? They shoot it and they blow it up. So all they do is sneak up behind it and pull a little chip out of its head, and it just freezes and it's over with. Once the thinking was removed, the destruction ended. Like I said, it was driven, was programmed to do. What is your mind programmed to do? That's the thing. We have to get past that. We were talking about in a group last night how conditions of life, if it's the church, if it's the way we're raised or school, whatever, sets in tone our thinking. And when we do the steps, we're looking at a deeper reality, a new reality. And it's hard to swallow for a lot of people, you know. So we're just like this Terminator with robot, you know. We're no different until certain elements of our are removed from our program. We will continue to resent and harm other people. All our problems are in our thinking. For instance, an insane mind will try to solve solutions where? Out here, always out here. I'm going to make the right money, the right this, the right that. And, you know, that's what we do. So an insane mind will believe change is about getting a new job, a new relationship, right? You know, breaking up with someone, changing the way they look, you know, beautifying themselves, or moving into a new house, something like that. Let's look at AA. I'm going to use AA as an example. I mean, it saddens me that close to 90% of AA members today see the solution outside themselves, right? And some people might go, 90%? Yeah, look around. You know, because they're looking for the solution at meetings before they do anything else. And most of all, other people, other powerless people. Think about that. But they hurry to the next meeting. What do? They check in, they write out slogans, they huddle together in groups discussing ways to stay sober, how to shield, you know, giving advice how to shield yourself from alcoholism and temptation, the thing that made us powerless. And they're telling you to do that one day at a time. And yet they're telling you to shield yourself from temptation while still fighting the obsession. That's not only dangerous, that's completely insane. I've been there before. You know, I was still fighting everything and everyone sober, including the obsession. It's not fun because I was still driven by misdirected instincts, still blinded by the obsession. I was completely asleep, like in the Matrix. You know what I mean? It's no clue that transformation was the answer. I was wondering what that little blue book up front always was, and why certain people at the meetings talked funny and said things like awakening and do the work. My friends used to call them my early AA friends who were just the meeting maker guys, we'd call them drill sergeants. What they were book thumpers, you know. In AA, you know, they say don't leave till the miracle happens. We need to seek that miracle, you know. And think about this. How did you feel when you're not drinking dry In between, you can't find your drugs or alcohol. How did you feel? How did you feel when you got a new job and you realized you had to dry up for a little bit? How did you feel in between? I know I felt miserable, bitter, angry, resentment. I felt everything I didn't want to feel. Was I aware at the time? I had no clue until I did step 4. And it was like, I didn't join Alcoholics Anonymous because I wanted to change my thinking relationship with God. I needed to stop this alcohol thing. But so many run away from step 4, pay the price. There's an old saying, and it's a brutal old saying, and it's the space between steps 3 and steps 4 is filled with dead bones of alcoholics. Now, you might think that's harsh, but it's very true. I know a lot of people that paid the price by staying in step 3 for so long, and that means that I'm going to do step 4 when I feel like it. But until you take that action and become aware of what drives your thoughts and your emotions, your words and behavior, you will continue to struggle with your thoughts, emotions. You'll be controlled by your thoughts, emotions, and behavior, because your thoughts and emotions will direct your life. Bottom of 64. We read this last week. So, because we left off right in the middle of this paragraph, we really went deep on resentment. It says, page 64, resentment is the number 1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anyone else. People in meetings believe, I believed for years that alcohol was the number 1 offender. It destroys more things than anything else. Of course it does. That's why we're here, right? That's why we're here. Yet, and when I did 4 through 9 and continue to do 4 through 9 step 10, I came into this deep awareness that resentment, that resentment kills more alcoholics than anything else. I knew it, and I understood that paragraph. When you go through this book, when you're working on step 4, and then you go back and read it again after you've done 4 through 9 total, you're like, this is a perfect example of a paragraph for you to go, oh, I didn't see that before, because you didn't understand it before. Once you go through this process, you understand it, because you have to see resentment for what it is, why it drives you. One reason it destroys more alcoholics than anything else is because it tells you to go seek revenge on those who harm us. But the reality, the only person that gets harmed the most is us. And we get guilt. And the difference between guilt and resentment is, I know who's to blame when I have guilt. I know it, otherwise it wouldn't be guilt. Back to the book. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. I always underline the word all in this big book. It's very important. People always say the must. What about the alls? It's very important. From all forms of spiritual. It's not leaving anything out there, right? For we have not only been mentally and physically ill, we've been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we strengthen mentally and physically. That's a promise. We strengthen mentally and physically, right? In other words, when we overcome this spiritual sickness, the obsession's gone. And if the obsession's gone, if I had an obsession with biting my fingers, and for some reason when I did that, I craved to do it more, the obsession's gone means I'm never going to bite my fingers again. As long as I do something to keep that obsession lowered. The obsession is not sitting there and going, oh, a drink sounds good today, or be refreshing on a summer day. That's not the obsession. The obsession is all of a sudden, it mysteriously pulls you towards drink. And you hear people say in AA, my car drove me to the gas station. They have no clue, because when people say that, they've been around AA for years and they like to talk, and then they relapse and they go, oh, my car drove me to the gas station. They say that bullshit because they don't know what the obsession is. Most of us, you think about it, the biggest problem in AA is not understanding step 4, it's understanding step 1. Most people don't get to have a first step experience. And go around to AA and ask people what the mental obsession and physical allergy is. Just do that. Try that. Give it a shot and see what happens. Most people have never had a first step experience. If I don't have a first step experience where I understand the allergy obsession, then how am I going to even want to understand what comes next? It changes everything. So now we're going to get down to conditions, right? It says in dealing with resentment, we set it on paper. That's our first condition in here. So the conditions required to achieve something, kind of like a prerequisite, you know, like to get somewhere. The condition is like I get in my car and drive myself there, something like that, right? But dealing with resentments, we set it on paper, not in our head anymore. We've been dealing with resentments in our head for years. So when you put it on paper, it starts to lose its power, and you start to look at it. Even if you don't understand it, you start to look at it and you start to see and go, wow, it sinks in. And then your sponsor's job is to listen, listen, listen on the fifth step, but also point the things out to you. It's also teaching you all this stuff, and most important, to do it with someone else. But as far as putting on paper goes, you know, the way I look at it is like this. How do I see, you know, how do you look at your nose? You can look cross-eyed, you can't see your nose. You have to go look in the mirror. How do you see your thoughts? You put them on paper, right? Many of us have never truly seen our thoughts for what they are and what drives our thoughts. Look, now we're gonna get deep. We listed people, institutions, or principles from whom we were angry, right? Another word for were is remain, you know, the deeper word. Let's look at, you know, let's look at those three as a list, so to speak, because this is where people mess up. People think, oh, I've heard people explain for or resentments, and they forget. They say it's just about people. And so I've had sponsees when I look at their four step, and it's just the people they're close to. This tells me much more than that. It says, so because people is an entire body of human beings. And what do? They constitute a community, right? Or tribe, or a nation, or race, or sexuality, or culture. It's a lot of people, right? And so it's not just my family. It could be a type of person. I resent this type of political person. I resent this type of, and you go deep on it, right? You go deep on it. You might resent a type of person that's against those type of people, like in a racial matter or something. Very important things to put down. All stones unturned. But then institution is one that's very important. People miss out on. That's an organization or establishment, a society, a foundation, a business. We've got to have. I mean, I love when people tell me that they don't have any resentments, but then they can't stand the prison system and all this stuff. It's exactly what we're talking about here, right? And you know, organization, establishment. We have plenty of resentments. You know, maybe also institution could be marriage, could be structures, different structures, but you know, it's some of them are long-held customs or practices we do in society that you resent. And then principles. Principles is deep. It's that's a system of beliefs, morals, you know, rules, laws, or ethical standards, right or wrong conduct type thing, ethical standards. But laws. I mean, I see so many guys come in and start, you know, bitching about years sober, bitching about laws. What's going on in the world? You know, a lot of people, you know, I've watched go down with you know, complain about wearing masks and COVID and all that stuff. And I don't want to get political, but they complained about, whether they write it down, whether you believe in it or not, or hate it or not, write it down, because we don't have time to figure it out. We're alcoholics. And I'm going to read out the 12 and 12 now, page 47, 12 and 12. So if you have one, if not, just listen. Just a small paragraph. But in AA, we slowly learned that something had to be done about our vengeful resentments, our self-pity, and unwanted pride. We had to see that every time we played the big shot, I love that, we turned people, against us, right? That's what it says there, against us. We had to see that when we harbored grudges, remember what a harbor does, collects, and planned revenge, remember the grouch and the brainstorm's not for us, and planned revenge for such defeats. I love how he says that. We plan revenge for such defeats. He's already saying we're defeated. We were really beating ourselves with a club of anger. Wow. So he's telling us when we plan revenge and all this stuff, how it comes back, we're beating ourselves with a club, like the hammer to get rid of the headache of the allergy to go drink, same idea. We had intended to use on others the hammer and anger. We learned that if we were seriously disturbed, our first need was to quiet that disturbance, regardless of who or what we thought caused it. Interesting. So how do we quiet our own disturbances? We got drunk. We quiet others' disturbances by going and telling them off and telling them how we feel, right? Back to 64. So look at this question. We asked ourselves why we were angry. Now this conventionally, it's not officially a prayer yet, but eventually when I start doing step 10, this can definitely turn into a prayer. I ask God why I'm angry on certain things, because I turn my life over to the care of God. How do I do that? As soon as the pen hits the paper, right? If I ask why I'm angry, I'm looking at God's working with me. He's building this with me, right? So what is anger? I mean, you get a lot of different answers for anger, and some people give different answers because they have different experiences with it, right? So it's this deep presence of displeasure, deep presence towards something or somebody. When we hold against that pleasure, against that displeasure, it's called resentments. And I like the word displeasure because dis is just another word for away from pleasure, away from peace, right? Displeasure. It's like the state of joy. That's where these steps are going to lead me. When I get rid of all this crap, all there is left in me is pure joy. If you ask, the thing about it, if you ask a person why they're angry, they don't know. They have no clue. All they will tell you, it's another's fault. In other words, is why. Look at the word there. Why we're angry. It's an important word. Why is very important. Why we're angry. If you do not do this process to seek the answers, you'll never know why you're angry. And you think about it. We've never thought of that before, but haven't we been seeking that for years? If we went to a shrink, if we went to some type of therapy, whatever we want to call it, we were trying to discover why we're angry. Here's why we're angry, and it's so straightforward. Now, if you haven't done a 4-step yet, this is hard to understand. It's not meant to you to understand the 4-step when you're doing it. It's meant for you to do it, right? In most cases, we found that our self-esteem, there's that self-esteem, right? So pride is how others think of me. Self-esteem is how I look at myself, high or low. High self-esteem means I think I'm better than people, and low self-esteem thinks I'm less than. We'll get more into that. Our pocketbooks, that's our, the material security, our ambitions. Remember, that's our goals for life. Like if I have ambitions to be a musician, and then all of a sudden I get 5 DUIs, I'm probably not going to get there. My ambitions have changed. Our personal relations, that's our relations with other people, including sex. Our sex relations with sex, not any intercourse, just sex relations. We were hurt or threatened. We were sore, we were burned up. Remember when I said that? When we have a resentment, our instincts are hurt or threatened. And I'm going to go, if I decide to go, if I have resentment against Kim, and I go, you know what? That guy, he's always playing that guitar, I'm going to go beat it over his head, So I go do it. Now it's a harm. It went from selfish to self-seeking, right? I satisfied that pain I felt. The pain we thought we always want to blame on other people was our own pain of our instincts. Look what it says next. On our grudge list, we set aside each name our injuries. So a grudge list means harboring ill feelings towards another person for something they did, or we think they did. Persistent feeling of resentment. And all the time, like I mentioned before, is guys will tell me, and women too, I have no resentments, or the only person I ever harmed is myself. Come on. It's laughable. It's like, so I came up with the idea, and you're going to see these primer sheets I put up here. And a primer, there's primer and there's primer. Primer is paint you put up on the wall. Primer is for education. And let me show you what this primer sheet looks like. And this is not inventory, it's the fish, it's for fishing. So when I write down this, I came with a grudge list. So I give us these people. Sometimes it's people that aren't struggling with the resentments. And I don't use it a lot, but I use it enough. And I explain to them what a grudge is, how it's a feeling displeasure to the person, and they fill it out. I just tell them, I tell these guys, write down all the people that you just want to like go tell them, oh, I got those, but they said they don't have resentment. The next thing you know, this page is filled out with names. I tell them to go back as far as they can. And that's when I say to them, I thought you said, you had no resentments. And they're like, oh, boom, light bulb goes on. But I explained to them that these names are people you resent, you're holding on to against from the past. Once they see it, and they start to get it. Some people have to be pushed a little bit to do these steps if they're willing to do the steps. If they're willing, there's a big difference there. Now I ask them to take these names and move it over to the resentment inventory. It's a fishing exercise, but it gives people a lot of names. And like I said, I don't use this with everybody, but for some, it works very, very well. But it's a primer. It's not part of the inventory process. They have these, you can look them up online, and they're called, prompt sheets. And it tells you like 200 resentments you might have. And I get sponsees, oh, I looked up my resentments, I found them all. And it's like they're digging, oh, you resent the church. Oh yeah, I resent that, I resent that. No, this is better because you're putting down your thoughts. Once you fill it out, you transfer it over to the resentment sheet, like I said. And like I said, when you tell people, you ask them to fill out this grudge sheet, when they see, and you go far back, they start to see it. So that's something, if you ever want it, any of these things, I'll be glad to give them to you. And our grudge list, we set it opposite each name our injuries. Here's the instincts again. Was our self-esteem? I look at it high or low. Our security, that feeling of being protected. Let's talk about our emotional security there. Our ambitions, right? Our ambitions, right? And our personal or sex relations, which have been interfered with. So interfered means to obstruct, sometimes through force or threat. When instincts, have that threat, it turns into resentment. So we're usually as definite as this example. I'm going to put this up here. It's the same thing you're going to see in your book, but we look at it a little bit more. So definite is this example. Before we look at the definite example, let's talk about the word definite, because it's very important here. It means sure or certain or clear. And one thing that amazes me in the world of recovery, and I know some of you see this, is how people can screw up this resentment inventory and make it way more complicated, way more. Like just adding stuff to it that's not in the big book, has nothing to do with the big book. And all that does is make 4 steps should only take you a few days to write, maybe a week. That's it. I mean, you got to remember these first 100, when the examples, these guys left detox with their amends list in their hands. They wrote their inventories and then did the 5th step within hours, right? Because why would I want to like speed through it? Because you have your whole life to do it. You can keep going on this. So, there's 100 different forms of inventory floating around the internet that don't even resemble. Some come from rehabs, which is not surprising. But people swear up and down it's inventory. Some have 6 columns, some have 10. But another definition for this word definite is something that is guaranteed not to change, right? And the word definite is synonymous with certain, exact, positive, final, guaranteed, undeniable, true, indispensable, indisputable, I mean, indispensable, precise, correct, and right, absolute. This, they remember the Oxford use the absolutes. It seems like Bill's trying to tell us something like this is how it's done. What's the title of this chapter? How it works. How it works. If I change how something works, what happens? I experience the hard way how it doesn't work. Opposite results. People change the recipe and wonder why they get different results, like the cookie recipe. You change the best cookies in the world that your friend has, and you go home and say, I want sugar, more sugar in this, or more. You no longer have the greatest cookie recipe in the world. You got your own invention. You get different results. I want the outcomes promised to me in this book. And, there's no reason someone should have a year or 2 years and still be stuck on this. He also uses the word example. Definite as this example. Example is something used as a model. So what they say an example, this is the model to follow. Definite. So let's look at it. So as you'll see, all the instincts are on here, pride's on here. We're going to look at that in a second, but this is the definite example. You have first column, who I resent, second column, the cause, and affects my. It's simple as that. It's very simple. And so I have this inventory packet that I use, and we're going to look at that compared to this. I'm going to show you this first. And before I get in this inventory packet, I want to explain something very important. Very important. When the big book was released in 39, it took many years for AE members to embrace it and do the steps. I mean, members were still doing 6 steps in Oxford. Imagine if you had 6 or 7 years of, 3 or 4 years of sobriety, and then this book comes out and you've only done these 6 steps, and then over the 3 years, are you going to jump and change what you're doing? No, they weren't. They were still doing 6 steps for a long time, to the mid 40s. And Cleveland started using the big book as a step guide. It was never intended to do a step guide. It was just to pass it on to people. But they started using it as that. And it wasn't until the 60s, a majority of members were using the big book. I mean, maybe late 50s when the second edition came out. I mean, mid 50s. But the real craziness happened in the 70s is the steps, you had not book dumpers in AA yet, but people were misquoting and misusing, taking the book out of contents, and everyone had their own version of how to do step 4, and members would argue over and over what it was meant to be. Enter Joe Mcquainey and Charlie Parmalee, are better known as Joe and Charlie. And in 1973, they were at an Al-Anon convention together, and they're introduced. Charlie was the main speaker, and they had a common interest of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what also they had in common was neither of them could get anyone to go through it the way they envisioned it, and they envisioned it the same. They considered themselves big book fundamentalists, and they would have their enemies and they would have huge followers. And what they wanted was a way for everyone to understand the big book and focus more on these meeting makers that are coming into AA and get them to go to the steps of the simple matter. So they started meeting each other's houses, and over time it grew. And then something happened, went crazy. In around 1980, they were the main speakers they were invited to be the main speakers at a smaller convention. And while no one really knew who they were asked to present the big book in a short book study, and they blew the crowd away. And we hear book dumpers all the time. There's tons of studies around here. This was these guys spoke that language we hear, like I'm doing right now. I want to know this language wasn't for these guys. They blew the crowd away, and the presentation was taped and circulated through AA. No internet, circulated through AA, and it sparked invitations to conventions and roundups. Even new roundups started just for them, and then they started Joe and Charlie book studies. These guys had a way of talking and presenting the big book, that anyone could understand. And they made the big book, come alive. That was the title of their group. They broke it down piece by piece by piece. Like big book compendium means to take something in smaller pieces and investigate those smaller pieces so you can understand it. And that's what these guys did. And before they came around, everyone was doing step 4 on a binder and sheet of paper. They took it 65 and made a graph, check boxes, and all this stuff. And a lot of people look at the check. I don't get those. Everybody was doing them from 84 to 98. Tons of people were doing them. Use those sheets. I even saw them when I came around in 96. And Joe and Charlie set AA on fire and turned it over on its ear. You can, my grand sponsor pushed these sheets through his sponsorship line. And for me, I can't do another way. I can't do another way. It makes it so simple. And you're gonna see it in a minute when I show you this stuff. About 15 years ago, when I started making, I made my own version. That's what you're gonna see. It's the exact same thing that they did. It's originated from the big book. So I got silver in 2000. I went to my grad sponsor's book studies, and they were basically doing Joe and Charlie, the same style, the jokes and everything. But the guys, it was 2000. It was all through my area. And what's funny is a lot of these other countries now are just getting Joe and Charlie because it's on YouTube. And there was guys I would talk to who were in 30 and 40 years 20 years ago. Now they have 60 years or something like that. They're still alive. And they would all said everything changed with Joe and Charlie. For me, the big book Comes Alive tapes was one of the foundations of my recovery. I would listen to them every day. And while I was doing the steps, and it helped me see the steps, I was amazed by the way they broke them down. And it's just so amazed. But because of Joe and Charlie, I began to understand the promises in the book. And the promises were just a destination. And most of all, I was experiencing those promises. But they broke the steps down in a way that anyone could understand. Kindergarten. That's why I try to do the best of my ability. But these studies transformed my life and transformed many other lives because they motivate you to do the steps. Take the fear out of doing the steps and keep doing the steps. But these guys with the blueprint, how big book studies are today, there would be no book thumpers. There would be no big book studies if it wasn't for these guys, because no one knew how to do them. They didn't exist until 1983. I wouldn't be doing this study. And no one has made more significant, bigger impact on Alcoholics Anonymous in the last 40 years than Joe and Charlie. So if you never listen to them, go to YouTube, check them out. You can listen to Joe Mcquainey's video on instinct, which is great. It's amazing. They never grow old. So this is our inventory packet that I put together with a committee of people, and it's evolved over the years. It's the latest version of it. But the thing is I named it Works Inventory. We did, because Works Publishing, AA, right? So I'm just going to take you a quick journey through it. So, whoa, that was quick. So this is like, we have this essential instincts for survival, which we studied in here already, the instincts. Then it has essential words. There's a bunch of definitions you'll see for every word you see on the 4th step, right? Every word. Then I put 65 in here so people can see it. Then I have the resentment inventory sheet, which we're going to look at in a minute in comparison. I'm going to go kind of quick here. So we have resentment inventory, fear inventory, and harm inventory, sex conduct. We have the sex ideal, where you write out your ideals for yourself, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, socially, security. We'll talk about that when we do the sex conduct, and your ideal partner. So where you look for yourself and those things, and that very important. So the thing about it is, first, I'm going to change this really quick. And I just want to do my first comparison. of these instincts. We can see every instinct is on here. Pride's down here. Now, not high and low self-esteem, but self-esteem's on here. That's the only thing that I like to put that on there so people understand self-esteem more. But it's really up to you. I'm not going to force a person to write down self-esteem high and low. Personal relations is on here. Material, which is pocketbook, is on here. It mentions it earlier too. So some of these are mentioned in the paragraphs earlier. And then emotional, it mentions earlier. And that emotional is that would be our emotional security. And then sex relations and ambitions, it's all on there. So let's look at the resentment compared to this, right? So in here we have Mr. Brown, his attention to my wife, right? Now, and then it says affected my, sex relations. It's pretty vague, but if you look at it through this way, you have all the instincts laid out. So I want to describe this sheet first to you. So you write down the person's name and who you resent. Now, if we tore off this side, all we would have is a confession, right? All we would have is a confession. We must go deeper. So this affects my section of the inventory is not a confession, makes this inventory not a confession. It's no longer a confession. It goes much deeper than that. It's a part of the inventory. It's about me. This part tells my story, right? We see why we did everything. And by knowing and understanding what drives me, right? It tells, what drives me, we see why we did everything we did. And by knowing and understanding what drives us, it changes the way we look at life. And those boxes across all these, some people just say, oh, the last column, which we'll go over in a minute, is our defects of character. All these are defects of character, right? And the exact natures are wrongs. And here's one thing. We've told people our wrongs before. We've admitted our wrongs to people. I wronged you and all that. But have you ever gone over or even looked at your exact nature of your wrongs? It's a big difference. Exact is precise and completely accurate, right? Someone's unmuted. Hold on. I guess they fixed it. So exact means precise and completely accurate, right? And that's what exact means. Nature is a characterized by something is recognized. So exact nature of wrongs would be the precise characteristics by which something is recognized, right? Now, the thing is that's what we're looking at here. So let's do Mr. Brown over here on this inventory sheet. Mr. Brown is attention, to my wife. Now, first of all, resentments can be fancied or they can be real. Fancied would be, let's say Mr. Brown never had any attention to his wife. He's waving at someone else, and I think he's paying attention to my wife. Real would be he's actually doing it, right? So we're going to look at it from that. We don't know what perspective because we're not Mr. Brown, but his attention to my wife. So Brown, obviously is someone he works with. So this must be an office. Let's give a setting to this, like an office party, right? His attention to my wife, because why would he bring his wife to work other than for an office party, right? So Mr. Brown's attention to wife affected his personal relations with Brown. I don't want to be around that guy. His self-esteem is high because he wants to kick the dude's ass, right? He thinks he's better than him. He's already talking better than him. Did it affect his pride, what other people think? Heck yeah, right? And sometimes we push into that. You see what that guy did? And then emotional security, right? Did it affect my emotional security? Here's a cut to the chase. Every resentment affects our emotional security. Material's not involved. There's no sex involved because Mr. Brown and I aren't doing that. But how about our ambitions, my goals at Mr. Brown? Does it affect the way I look at him socially? Absolutely, I check it. Security, I check it. And then selfish and frightened, we'll get to in a minute. We'll look at that. What does that mean, right? Let's look at the next one on here. Told my wife of my mistress. Now, here's one reason why you just don't write, why you write these down in detail. precise detail. You can't just say, Mr. Brown likes my wife. Attention to my wife's a little bit, told my wife of my mistress. Whoa, here's a guy that resents Mr. Brown looking at his wife, but he has a mistress also. Interesting. So do you think this affects the sex relations? Of course, right? With the mistress. So, and his wife too, right? So that would go over to the harm inventory, that part, towards his wife. And the thing is basically, what does that look like? Told the wife, my mistress. Same thing, personal relations, high self-esteem, pride, emotional security, sex relations now. That's why everything's, can be different. We don't cram everything into one box, right? Everything is separate. Social, my ambitions with him, yeah, security and sex, right? And the last one, Mr. Brown may get a job at my office. Let's look at that one on here. Mr. Brown may get a job at my office. Now it's going to be different again, right? Because personal relations affected because he wants my job. I'm really mad at him now. High self-esteem. I don't see any low self-esteem in this guy. It would be like, where he might feel bad about that, or feel like, creating not good. I don't know. I'm not Mr. Brown, but he thinks he's better than him. That's why I keep saying hi. And then pride, because if he takes your job, then everyone knows about it. Fear what others think of you. Emotional security, of course. Material, right? So now we're in the world of material because it's a job he's taking. No sex relations there, but social and security, right? Does that look that difficult? It's not. It's not. It's not. See, all this is a template to make all that long-winded writing on a piece of binder paper easier. That's why they did this. And I've read things like Joe Mcquainey and Charlie and Joe did not create this checkbox thing until around 80, like right before they did their book studies. And they said the amount of sponsees doing inventory went way up as far as completing it because it's so easy. Now, I've done it on binder paper, but I like to see these instincts. I like to see them in front of me. So let's go to page 67 and look at that last column. 67. So there's some deep directions here and very good ones, and vitally important ones, by the way. Referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely, which means showing firm determination, resolutely searched for our own mistakes. Mistakes is our thought or action that is misguided and wrong. Some call it error. Where we've been selfish. Now cover up the word where for a second on there. And all it says is, had we been selfish? That's just a question. Where makes it a difference. It means we're looking for a location. Where had we been selfish? Not had we been selfish. That's a question we want, just because it's easy, right? It's a big difference there, big difference. So let's look at these words. Where had we been selfish? Selfish, we know, is tending mostly to my own needs with little or no concern for others. That's a thought. Dishonest is an action. It's the action of lying, stealing, cheating, deceiving somebody. That would fall more into the harms inventory. Where self-seeking. Self-seeking is the act of pursuing my selfish needs, my interest. So like I was saying earlier, I resent Kim, so I go harm him. That would be self-seeking. Selfish is self-seeking. Frightened falls under all these. It's a state of fear. The state of fear is also a thought. Because those situations had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person's involvement entirely. So that would be column one, right? The person. And here's an important question. Where were we to blame? See, the most unique feature of anger is that it's always insists others are to blame. which totally blinds us from seeing our part. And it convinces us that we're these innocent victims of wrongdoings of others. You know, if it's always another's fault, then we are always at the mercy of that person. We are the maker of who we are, not another person. We need to stop blaming others for who we are and take ownership for who we are. This is where that happens. Where are we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. We saw our faults, we listed them, we placed them before us in black and white. We made our thoughts honestly and we're willing to set matters straight. So the interesting thing is we try to disregard the other person's involvement entirely. So the interesting part, it tells us to put out of our minds the wrongs others have done, and then try to disregard the other person's involvement. Wow. Then it tells us, you know, by disregarding the other person and putting out of the minds what they did, it leaves me only one section to look at. My story. Affects my column 3. Where am I to blame? It's there I see how selfishness, I was seeing that how instincts affected me. These instincts out of balance, misdirected, are my story. I see how pride drove my selfishness. I see how high self-esteem made it all about me. Low self-esteem kept me in fear. So we're trying to live a life on self-will and run the show ourselves. This is it right here. Self-will is these instincts. Misdirected. Can that lead me to being selfish? Can it lead me to being dishonest? Can they lead me to being self-seeking? Can they lead me to being frightened? Absolutely. The 4th column is the end result of my life driven by these instincts, right? It gets away from us being the victim, where we blame everybody else. Newsflash, there's no recovery being a victim, ever. And the more you're a victim, most people don't want to listen to you anymore. And that's the thing. I'm talking people that have long-term recovery and say victims. Here we see the truth that we are selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. And so many people never get out of the 2nd column. They stay for years what the person did. We want to get into the 3rd column, these instincts. We want to make sure, by the time you are done with step over the 3rd column, your sponsor and you no longer see the 2nd column anymore. That's the job of a good sponsor. Here's another way to look at it. Column 1 would be, who do I have displeasure with? 2nd column would be, what did the person do, imaginary or real, to produce that feeling? 3rd column is, what drives me into feeling that displeasure? And the 4th column, what is the end results of that recurring displeasure? I'll do an example of my own. I don't want to, give up too many things personal or mention names, but I'll try to think of one. I remember I had a really, a decent job in between, and I, of course, cut back on using it and stuff. I was sober for a while, and I got this job working for this company. I got a friend working for this company. It was Nabisco. And basically what happened was my friend came, working for me there, and he wound up kind of telling lies to the boss about me and moved ahead of me in that position. And then eventually worked with another guy to get me fired. And this is supposed to be a friend of mine. So we'll call him Mr. X. So Mr. X I resented him because he took my job. He got me fired. And of course I'm an addict at the time and stuff, so it's not, but it affected my personal relations with him. This guy was a close friend. Of course it did. My self-esteem was low. Unlike some people might want to go kick that dude's, ass, my self-esteem was low. I felt less than, like, oh my God, why does this always happen to me? And so my version of going to him was not in anger, but going to him and saying, why would you do this? And did it affect my pride? Yeah, other people knew about it. It made people put me in a light that I didn't want to see or I was exposed to. Did it affect my emotional security? Yes, my material security. And it was affected my social security. And I was selfish and frightened. And I did not see I was selfish and frightened in there. Right? I remember doing a workshop up in the mountains over here in Tahoe. And this guy got up there and he said something very deep. He slammed his fist down the table during this workshop and he asked us, he said, I was molested as a kid. How am I selfish? And I gathered my thoughts, and what came out was pure spirit. Like you kind of go, where did that come from? Prophesizing, you want to call it, whatever. And it just came out. I just said, it's not what happened to you is horrible, but it's what you've done with it for the past 30 years, right? We look at these resentments. You have resentment against your parents. I didn't talk to my parents in 12 years. I got sober. It's not about what they did, it's what I did with it. And then all of a sudden they lose their depth and weight, and that's the deepness of it. That's the deepness of this. If anyone wants the inventory pack, I'd love to give it to you. It works so good. And I'm not just saying because we work on it. I wouldn't endorse something that didn't fly like that. And it gets people to go deep. It gets people to get to the inventory quicker, and it gets through a lot of nonsense of other stuff that's nothing to do with the inventory. If you're doing an inventory that doesn't ask you, if it goes beyond those instincts and has questions that aren't in the big book, then it's not, you have your own invention, you're not gonna get the same results. So this is simplified. Ask anyone that's done these check boxes and they'll tell you there's still lots of people out there. Some people denounce these, but if they're around in the 80s, they would never do that because everybody was doing it and everybody knew where they came from. I mean, Joe and Charlie like rock stars but here's the thing is, there's no peace of mind in holding resentment, a grudge. If anything, if anything, against anyone, the only ones that suffer is, like I said, is ourselves. And the moment we start, to resent a person, what do we become? A slave in the bondage of self. We want freedom from the bondage of self, because I don't want my thoughts controlled anymore. I don't want my dreams, destroyed anymore. I don't want to be robbed of my peace of mind anymore. And there's no way to escape it. And here's why: it's because we drank for so long. If you start drinking when you're 16, then you get sober at 35, and you have the emotional balance of a 16-year-old, because we've been self-medicating. So there's no way to escape it. There's no happiness. Ultimately, resentment hurts us far more than the other person. So we need to stop dwelling on it, obsessing over the past. Stop letting resentment control us. Stop letting them drag and destroy us. Stop blaming the other person, which stops the pain. It's a whole, spinning the same thoughts in your head over and over again for years. I always tell, I don't resent that person anymore. I go, let's bring this person in the room and see how you feel. I don't want to see him. I haven't thought that, I don't resent that person anymore because you haven't seen him in years, but I don't want to see that person. That's another way to look at resentments: is who are people in your life you care that you will never see ever again. I can care less I see that person ever again. That person goes on resentments, right? So don't let the resentments define you and drag you into that. Close the book of your past. Be an open book. Be yourself. Think of it like this: when a t-shirt is torn, we don't hold on to it, we discard it. It's never worn again. When a chair is broken, it is tossed to the side because it is no longer use for us. We need to do the same thing with resentments. First, locate what created the resentment, admit it to another person and God, and let it go, right? We've been trying to let it go our whole lives, but we only wanted to admit one thing at a time. Everything put down gets us to see that, right? Let go of what no longer serves you. Let go of your pain. Because when you let go of them, you discover one of the highest realms of thought that's impossible to reach as far as I know. with, in this level, it's called compassion. That's where we want to be. So when we become aware of our misdirected instincts, we receive humility. In other words, allowing our instincts to guide us in the absence of humility, the absence of pride. I mean, it is pride. So facing these instincts is a practice of humility. And it's the ultimate practice, letting God guide us. I'm going to close with this thought. So these choices we make, they direct something called character. And by taking action, we can have that, they defeat our character, right? And taking this action, we can have our character back, who we really are, by always examining our thoughts because they are our words. So always examine your thoughts because they become your words. Be honest with your words because they become your actions, and know your actions because they define your character, right? It is your character that defines you and propels you to greatness. Good character is a result of lots and lots of hard work, not sitting under a tree hoping to be a better person. Next week, we will look at harms, and I'm going to turn this off.